about a man who loves you and introduced us to you. And so we thank you for the time to remember him and to celebrate his life, get the glory out of our conversation, and bless our lives to your service in Jesus' name. Amen and amen.
Amen.
So I don't know if you've ever heard my story about my meeting Reverend Haynes, but I want to share that with you tonight. And my mother went to 12th Baptist Church on Sharman Avenue, and I remember going to Sharman Avenue's to church as a young lad, bored to death, listening to Dr. Hester preach. I had an opportunity to listen to Rev, but I was just too young to understand what he was saying, and I ended up drifting away from church. I don't know if you know this, that in Boston they used to have something called a weekday religious education. And
Mm.
one day a week, I was in junior high, one day a week, we went to the church of our choice, and we had an opportunity to sit in a religious class, and Reverend Haynes was the teacher. I didn't know, I knew Reverend Hester, but I didn't know Reverend Haynes. And so the first day that I went into the class, I was a knucklehead. I always tried to upset things. I was misguided, and I was going to wreck the class. I knew I could do it, and I tried to take on Reverend Haynes. And he did something that no man had ever done in my life before. He told me when I was trying to upset the class of junior high school students, he said, "Get up, go pick up that doll, and go sit on the stage." And I had to decide whether or not I was going to do it, knowing that if I did it, my friends would say, "You just got punked," or whether I was gonna try to resist it. And I couldn't because his tone, the way he looked, I had to obey. And I after the class, I said to myself, no man has ever challenged me like that or scared me like that. And I had to find out who he was. And after that event, I started going to 12th Baptist Church. And it was my mother who said
Mm.
to him, I need help with him. Can you help? And that's how I was really formally introduced to Reverend Haynes. And as I look at it now, we went on to become friends, buddies, and he was mentoring me for over 50 years. That is crazy when I think about 50 years of being mentored by somebody like him who had so much to offer, not just to me, but to all the people that he had a relationship with. So that's how I met him, and just hanging out with him, my life went through transformation and it went
Mm.
through change. How was your introduction made, if you remember the details?
I like you, Pastor Wall, with Reverend Haynes, there's a certain kind of authority, both that comes across both in the voice, that voice is underpinned by character of the person, and then a kind of a moral authority. And I attended 12 Baptist Church during the summer. I was had moved from middle school and was in high school. And I went one Sunday and just saw him at the pulpit preaching. And just in the same way that you were impacted by that sense of authority and power in the person, and someone who was very careful at choosing his words. I had fallen in love with the words at the time, and I just found someone who embodied a certain kind of discourse. And the following Sunday, I made sure to attend 12 Baptist Church, and I had a handwritten essay with a pencil that had written at a local library on Martin Luther King, not knowing that Reverend Haynes had a previous relationship with Martin Luther King. But I found someone that I thought in my reading, and I was still discovering the civil rights movement. I think at the time, 14 years old, and just reading a lot and spending a lot of time in a local library and reading a lot. And then I was like, oh, here's someone that this man that I have seen in church for the first time would be impressed by if I wrote about him.
Mm.
So it was a two-page essay. I don't have that essay anymore, but something about his life. I wanted to sort of communicate that to Reverend Haynes. And so I kind of, it was hard to, corner him after church because he's oftentimes saying hello and greeting people
Yeah.
and having long conversations. But I waited long enough. It was actually at the Second African Meeting House, which is right next to 12 Baptist Church. And he was about to go upstairs, and I interrupted him, and I said, I wrote something that I want to share with you.
Uh,
And that was my introduction to him. It was my introduction with him was two pieces of paper. And he stops, he reads it really quickly. And the first question was, did I write this? And I said, yes, I wrote that. And then the next question was, do you do yard work? And and I said, yes, I do yard work, but I not knowing what that
Yeah.
entailed, I had never done yard work. I had come from a boarding school where we sort of worked on the farm, and I was like, oh, it's probably something along that line. So, and he's like, well, I'll see you next Saturday. Uh, Gave me the address, and then I walked to his home on 26 Clifford Street. And that following Saturday, I was doing yard work, and um, and that's how it began. And he, as you know very well, he would work from sunup to sundown in his yard. He loved his yard very much. And the only person who made him stop to feed me, and I got 2 Fig Newtons and a Coke, was Grandma Edna. She's like,
Yeah.
give that kid some food. And that's how it began. It was through this writing. And I want to build that thread, Bruce, because the next thing that this man did for me was just imbue me with a sense of possibility and continuing on as a writer. He was really deeply invested in me becoming as a writer. And by the time I graduate from high school, he has me writing the church bulletins, and then he's editing them. And we're at the second African Meeting House. As you know, he called himself a night owl.
Hmm.
You remember that? And he would start his work day started at 7 p.m. after dinner, and until 1, 2 o'clock, we're in the Second African Meeting House, and I'm writing. And the first time that I publicly wrote that I shared something that was publicly shared was during one of those major annual reports that he loved to do with all the
Yeah.
pictures cut out and all that, right? And he told me to write his story, and so I researched it and wrote it, and he published it and there's a copy of it somewhere. And then just to sort of bookend that, um, all of that was preparation to writing his obituary. And so, and within a week of his passing on September 12th, 2019, I had written his obituary, and he was very particular about what went out publicly about him, about anything that was written. He was an amazing editor, and very, very meticulous about phrasing and word choice and so on. And all of that was preparation for that moment when, even in feeling the most profound loss of my life, um, I had the skill and know-how to write in a way that would resonate uh, across all the people that he has touched. And Reverend Haynes has Reverend Haynes is the only one who can fill a room, in my opinion, with such a range of diverse people from all walks of life, from all corners of the world.
Mhm.
So there's a through line about writing and who I am. Right now, I'm the executive director of Write Boston, and all I do is write. And these were like early on lessons from the age of 14.
Well, uh, that's amazing. When I was 16 or 17, I can't recall exactly. I lived on Seaver Street with my mother and my sisters.
Mm,
And my mother decided she was going to move from Seaver Street to Hyde Park.
mhm,
And we were all getting excited about the fact that we would be moving out of Dorchester and going to Hyde Park, wherever that was. We didn't know much about it. And the movers came that day. They moved my mother's bedroom, my sister's bedroom, the kitchen, the laundry room, the living room. There was only one room that was not touched. That was my room. And she didn't let me move with the family.
mm,
And part of it was that I was just getting in trouble and not doing well. And the only place I had to go was to Reverend Haynes's mother's second floor. And that's where I stayed until the apartment downstairs opened up. Uh, Mrs. Haynes took care of me.
yeah.
And to this day, I had to ask my mother years later, why did you just leave me like that? And she said, you didn't say you wanted to go.
Mm.
And I wanted to come back at her and say, does that make any sense to you? You're gonna leave your son in that house by himself. But that started you talk about doing the grass and the snow and buying tractors to move the snow. And the key word that Reverend Haynes would always use, with me anyway, was I want the work to be thorough. Make it thorough, right?
Yeah.
We could spend the rest of this broadcast coming up with his terms and his expressions. But
Yeah.
my life began to change very positively because I pulled myself off of the streets and I started going to church to understand it. It was funny that Reverend Haynes and I would go to prayer meetings on boring prayer meetings on Friday night, Abdi. There would be about 12 people there.
Mhm.
Reverend Haynes and I, and the rest were senior citizens. And it was boring. And Reverend Haynes and I would have gone out for dinner, and after dinner we drove into the prayer meeting. And the seniors would get up and they would share the same testimony every single Friday night. I could tell you what they were going to say. And I said, this is not making any sense, Reverend Haynes. Until one day I decided that I was going to share my testimony. I don't
Mm,
even think I was a believer at the time, but I was
mm,
going to share my testimony because I had been listening to this stuff. Mine couldn't be half as bad as this. So I wrote out what I wanted to say, held the paper down, stood up and recited it, just read it. And I felt like I had accomplished something.
mm,
And unlike you, Abdi, don't laugh at this when you hear this, but when I went to the Boston Public Schools from kindergarten all the way to the 12th grade, I had never read a book
mm,
before. I had never written a paper before, never wrote a paper in school before. And on the week that the young people, my class was going to graduate, that week I walked out of school after having a verbal altercation with the phys ed teacher.
mm,
And it was a white teacher who called my mother and called me and said, this is the last week. He can make it. He can do it. And she encouraged me to come back and I graduated. So you had the potential being an intellectual, a person who really understood education, and now you're in education. I was a guy that was misguided and
Yeah.
lost. But do you
Mm.
see how he had the capacity to meet us both where we were at?
Mhm.
Me and my street craziness, and you really trying to find your way.
Yeah.
And if we were to analyze all of the various people that he helped to grow,
Mhm.
um, we would find different people. But
Mhm.
but he did it.
Yeah.
So how did you feel about well, how did your whole academic piece develop for you?
Um, so the yard work turns into sleeping um, on the second floor across from Grandma Edna's bedroom.
That was my room.
That was yours? Did you sleep on the fold out uh, chair sofa?
Oh, mine was he had t twin beds in that room without
Oh,
books.
I didn't get the twin beds were gone by the time I
Yes.
got that. How
Yeah,
are you, Mrs. Scott?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good, good. Good to
Good.
see you. Good
To see
evening to
you as
you.
well. Good
Yeah.
evening.
Yeah.
So you all were reminiscing?
Yes, we are.
Yeah,
And
but just he's talking about his whole educational thing. Then we'll go to you.
okay. So um and so he says and I didn't get a bed for a while, you know that. I slept on on this thing that it was sort of like a a single seat, but if you pulled out the cushion, it opened out into a kind of like a twin size bed of some kind, right?
Okay.
And um and so I would throw the sheets on there, and so and at the time, by the time I'm in high school, I'm an undocumented student. I have no school to go to, so I tell him, it was the summertime. I started working for him, and I said, I don't have a school to go to, and so he said, okay, we'll figure this thing out. Makes a couple of calls, and by September, I'm commuting all the way out to Lexington Christian Academy.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it was a horrendous commute from Roxbury all the way out to Lexington.
Mm.
But he got me into high school, and then from there it was I just needed a place to sleep and food on the table. And this man would um, pick me up after school and always look forward to eating with him. And there was such an education about the world, about you know, even eating at a restaurant. Uh, Bruce, when you talk about how, all he met us where we are and then sort of built us up from there. For me, it was about the exposure to Boston and eating at the Parker House
Yeah.
certain evenings, or eating at Pier 4,
Yeah.
and then eating at his kitchen where he would prepare meals.
Hmm.
And many people can't believe this, but he cooked American chop suey. I don't know if you've ever had his American chop suey, but he cooked American chop suey for me after school. And also he liked this eggs with cream sauce. Did you ever have that?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And he would say that was his mother's recipe. And Reverend Haynes was sort of, and he loved this Boston Bibs. But there was a sense in which those were the things that I was learning, Bruce, about how to be a dad. Like they were like foundational things. And when my children were born, it was quite natural that I knew that I would be expected to cook.
Wow.
And so the education was quite broad. He actually around me, he kind of did this what he kind of like a fake out thing. I was interested in ideas, and I wanted to debate him about issues in the Bible and contradictions that I found and things that didn't quite line up, and why this and why that. And then he would just say, why don't you learn how to dig a hole and put that plant in, you know? And there were these very, very kind of like mind shifts that he would do with me because I wanted to argue with him about biblical matters and theology. And he would just push me into an education about life. And for the last 5 years, I kid you not. So I've worked in this yard. I think probably the longest. I have the longest record of working in this yard. It's like it's going almost on 40 years,
Wow.
right? But over the last 5 years, Bruce, all of that learning,
Yeah.
that this yard looks gorgeous. It's not his aesthetic, but there's something about the way in which I learn. I like all of those lessons about when to plant, what to plant, where to put it, how to condition the soil. Those kinds of things are the things that actually are an integral part of my own mental health and my own adjusted, well-adjusted, well-integrated life. And I know you may not like this, but I because it doesn't line up biblically, but Pastor Wall, I commune with him in this yard. And I still feel those lessons of how to put the yard away for the winter, how to get it ready for the summer. What should I do in October? Putting the tulips in. All of those things are by far the most enriching aspects of my life now than the books that I wanted to read with him and debate with him and all of that stuff. So that's the kind of education that now I think about and reflect on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lynette, how did you meet Reverend Haynes? What was your point of contact?
Well, Scott's here too. He wants to say something. Well, my first meeting with Reverend Haynes was at 12th Baptist Church, of course. And as you know, I was very young when he actually, well, I was there when he was actually, I guess, the youth pastor back in the day, because from the time I was born, I was at 12th Baptist. And at that time, Reverend Hester was the pastor. So it was after Reverend Hester passed that Reverend Haynes, you know, took on that role. And that's where I really got to know him. And some of the memories I have, I guess, from the time I was very young was just his commitment to young people. It was so evident in 12th Baptist Church that he was concerned about young people. He was concerned about their education. He was concerned about what happened to them during the summer. He was just concerned. And he was very much into talking to and meeting with young people. So that was my first encounter. I think I got to know him probably even better as I got ready to go into my high school years and then into college. And then when he became involved in Richard Scott's life. And I think some of the things that really stand out for me about him, well, there are a few things. Okay, so one was his commitment to having good music in the church.
Yeah.
And, you know, he made sure that we were exposed to the best in terms of musicians, not just the quality of choral music, but they were, you know, instruments. And it was just so evident that that was something that was important to him. And because of that exposure, even to this day, the exposure that I have for hymns, I love hymns. And that, I know that comes from what he implanted. Another thing that really stuck out with me with him is the way that he conducted the congregation in singing. I have never experienced that since. And I'm just hoping when I get to heaven that Reverend Haynes will lead, lead a couple of songs. But that was one thing. I mean, there was just such, I don't know, he transferred such emotion that you wanted to sing, even if you couldn't sing. You know, the congregation was singing. It was wonderful. Another thing that really struck me when I was either in high school or in my college years, he was running for representative. And I'd gone to a meeting in Mattapan. And at that meeting, I think it was during the time he was deciding whether or not he was going to continue to run. And we're at a meeting, and someone there wanted him to do something that wasn't quite ethical, I'll say. And he stood up and he said, I will not do that. And to me, the integrity that he had, you know, to live a life of honesty, live a life, you know, of no one could, he didn't want to live a life where someone could say, oh, you did such and such. That's not the kind of life he wanted to live. And even outside of the church, when he stood up in that meeting and he said that, you know, I'm not going to do that. Nope, I'm not going to do that. It just meant so much to me. I said, this man is really, you know, has integrity. Let me see. Well, there's some other things too, but Scott, you want to say something?
Oh, sure.
Oh, no, well, okay. Let me.
So much.
When Beverly couldn't take him to his appointments, actually Beverly, she would. I'm sorry she's not here, but she had. She's at the Museum of Science. No, the Museum of Fine Arts tonight, watching a movie. But anyway, when Beverly couldn't take him to his appointments, I was the backup, or we were the backup. So we would take him, and he would whistle. He'd be whistling these hymns, and I just loved it. You know, we'd be in the elevator, he just whistling, and you know, just as nice. And afterwards, he wanted to go to the Whole Foods over there near Mass General.
Yep.
We go in there, and it wasn't like he was really doing a whole lot of shopping, but he'd pick up a few items, but he would take his time and just push the cart and look at he liked the bread. So there were certain things that he would go for in there. And it's just, it was just a great time. I thank God that I was able to at least go with him a few times to those appointments and just be with him, you know, and just listen to him. Because even then, he was still giving wisdom, you know, about life. You know, it was incredible, actually incredible. And he had his thoughts about you know, politically what was happening too at that time. Yeah.
Wow.
Great. Scott, you want?
Oh,
go
sure.
ahead.
Yeah. There's so much I can say, but I'll narrow it down to three. One is that March 14th, 1971, 17 years old, I heard the gospel. He preached a sermon from Romans 5 and 6 called Get Right with God. And the Lord used him through the word of God to get me saved instead of just a churchgoer and religious person. And so I praise God for that he was used to help me to get into heaven one day. Secondly, when I was a youngster also, I went to a BYF, Baptist Youth Fellowship meeting. And we were talking in there to different youth because he always could parlay with anyone at any level. And so anyway, the short of it is that somehow he found out from my meeting that I needed $40 to pay for some fees in order to apply to college. And so after the meeting, he comes and he hands me $40. He says, here, you know, he gave me $40. And I said, well, I'm going to pay you back. And the second part of this is he could spot character. He could tell when someone was jive, shaky. He could spot character. Okay. And I was determined to pay him back. He said, oh, no, you don't have to pay me back. I see him on a Sunday. He's going up the stairs, getting ready to preach. Here's $2. I cashed some bottles. Okay. Here's $15 here. Next week, here's $5, whatever. And I paid him back. And I was just so thankful for him because he saw something in me. He didn't want request me to pay him back, but that made me. I wanted to show him, yes, that how thankful I was and that I had some character. Wow. The third thing I want to tell you is that because of him, and I have this in my phone. These are folks that I met personally through knowing Reverend Haynes, either with him or through his instrumentation. Billy Graham. I have a Bible signed by him. Billy Graham. Dr. Harold Lindsell, author of the 1976 book, The Battle for the Bible. It's about scriptural inerrancy. Dr. John Hope Franklin, historian, from slavery to freedom, George Washington Williams. Shirley Chisholm, Black woman, representative, New York, ran for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Okay,
Mel King,
church.
Mel King, first Black man to run as a finalist for mayor of Boston in 1983 versus Raymond Flynn. Roy Haynes, who's his brother and world-renowned drummer. Rosie Greer of the Fearsome Foursome LA Rams signed my foot cast when I was injured in a newspaper story done back then. I saw in person and heard speak Senators Edward and Joe Kennedy, Birch Bayh, Raymond Muskie, who was running for president, Massachusetts Governors Sargent, Dukakis, Mayors Kevin White, Raymond Flynn, Thomas Menino, Coretta Scott King, E.V. Hill, Edward Victor Hill, famous preacher. See him on YouTube. Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, who came and preached at All Baptist Church and sang Precious Lord. Take my hand, okay, from the man himself. So Thomas Dorsey, Linda Hopkins, Broadway actress, blues gospel singer, Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
Jackson, matter of fact, Kristen pulled the lever from, well, I ain't gonna say my political party. Okay, but anyway, at that time, yeah. So anyway, I pulled the, she pulled the lever for me in that situation. It was really her voting. So anyway, Winnie Mandela, Lenny Zakem, the bridge is named after, right? The beloved social justice activist for which the bridge is named. Tom Skinner, a warrior for Christ, ex-gang member, and Louis Farrakhan. And then I have down here, I'll add more, Lord willing, as they come to me.
Wow.
All to the Reverend Dr. Michael Eustace Haynes.
Wow. Those memories.
Yes.
I wanted to talk about a decision that I had to make, but before I go there, do you know, in planning his funeral, he and I were planning his funeral. We were working on it for 3 years. 3 years we were working on it. It was no, I don't like this. I don't like this. Put it away. No. I would type it all up and then he would sit there. I said, Reverend Haynes, you can't sleep right now. We gotta get your head off the table. We have to work on this. We have to work on this. And he would take his black pen and he would start crossing things out, and I had to go. And he would cross out the whole thing, and I would have to go and do it again. The element of perfection and wanting things done right. In his death, in his preparation for his death, he wanted that funeral to represent the kingdom of God. I just remember all of these times that we have worked together. And you guys may not know this, but again, as I said to you, Abdi, earlier, I was misguided when I was in senior high school, junior high school. And I had to make a decision as to what I was going to do with my life when I turned 18. And I seriously considered joining the armed services because I wanted to go over to Vietnam. Why did I want to go to Vietnam? I don't know. But I just wanted to go and do what my friends were doing. They were all joining the service. Just like Reverend Haynes, Abdi opened the door for you to go to Lexington Christian Academy, Lexington. He opened the door for me to go to Berkshire Christian College. And I followed his wisdom, his guidance, and went to Berkshire Christian College. My life changed and was completely transformed by some of the pain that I experienced there. But coming out of the pain, the joy, and learning how to love people who were different from me in so many different ways. And I remember the youth, they used to have an annual youth crusade at Berkshire Christian College. And we would bring all the folk from 12th Baptist Church, all the teenagers from 12th, getting on the Mass Pike with the 2 vans, driving down for 3 days. Scotty, did you ever go to the
one, I think.
Yeah.
One.
Lynette, did you go?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And that may have been before your time, Abdi. But I will forever be thankful that he opened a door for me to go to that small Christian college, because I could have made it anywhere else other than that place. And I'm glad that he made the recommendation and I learned how to trust his judgment.
Mm.
And God kept me. God kept me there. So it's been how many years? 5 years since he.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, 5 years, 50-year anniversary.
So in thinking about it, Abdi, and thinking
Mm.
about 5 years ago, what have you been thinking about?
A lot about his legacy. I do this exercise where I organize his life in decades by 7 years, and I'm just fascinated by he's a self-described C student, barely made it out of school, right? Wasn't an athlete, wasn't a star student, and the angel of his life is V. Simpson Turner, right? Who sort of set him uh, uh, and set his life on a course that forever changed so many other lives, right? And I was thinking, in when you invited me to sort of share this, I decided, like, let me do another exercise of just sort of breaking from May 9th, 1927 to September 12th, 2019 into increments of 7 years. And I was like, let me see what I would discover about his life. And the one thing so the C student, so here's the C student who at the age of 18 is a camp director, right? This is the C student who sort of bumbled through school, right? And very few people gave him a shot. At 22, 4 years later, you know what he's doing, Bruce? He's the Minister of Youth at TBC.
Mm-hmm.
4 years later, at the age of 22. Do you know how old he is when he becomes the interim pastor and Reverend Hester passes away? He's 35 years old.
Wow.
And at the age of 36 in 1965, October 24th, 1965, he is the pastor of the historic 12 Baptist Church at the age of 36.
Mm.
Wow.
Right? That's about what? If I do the math correctly, that's about 18 years out of high school, correct?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
18 years out of high school, he's the interim pastor of the most revered pulpit in this town. One of the most revered pulpit, one of the most historic pulpits in this town, right? And that's the part that I just am deeply fascinated by. And for me, like 1964, 1965 is just in a very, very pivotal time because he's also in the legislature, right? And he is at the pulpit of 12 Baptist Church at the age of 36. And I'm trying to understand how someone so rapidly puts together a portfolio of that magnitude.
You're on mute, Pastor.
You're muted, Pastor.
Yeah.
I'm muting myself because of the dogs. When you begin to look at you've got the chronology, the years, are you in the process of writing a book regarding Reverend Haynes? Is that in your heart?
Oh, it is. I have, and so here's the thing, and this is the challenge. This is the daunting task. So there's a whole living room in my house where I have the very same folder that you were describing, the three different yellow folders just about the funeral, right? Funeral plans. I have that. But I also have in my possession his middle school science notebook from Timothy.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
Right? And he saved everything.
Mm.
And he saved them for a reason. And he would instruct me towards the latter stage of his life, which he described in the declining, and he was, he could be very poetic at times, right? As we all know, in the declining years of his life, he's like, Abdi, don't throw a single thing away because you might throw something really, really important.
Mhm.
So I live with his intellectual, what I describe as his intellectual property, his life's work, his sermons. I mean, we can talk about the ways in which, even when he gets to TBC, the kind of, and you would love this, Bruce, because you love technology, but the kind of technology that he is bringing to his ministry. I have tapes. I have, those, I don't even know what they call them anymore.
Reel.
Yeah, real. So all of that exists, Bruce. And
Hold on a second. Where did you find the reels?
oh, in the basement.
Oh, they weren't in the closet where his clothes were?
Oh yes. That was another batch of, yeah.
Another
Wow.
batch. That's the second batch.
Yeah. They're everywhere, right?
Wow.
There are, and they're photo, and as you all may remember, he loved to take photos.
Yes.
And
Yes.
even when he was at Norfolk House, he would have people take photos and he would save them. And so have these generations of young people,
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And their photos, and he document. So the only thing that makes me super scared about a project like that, Bruce, trying to sort of put together this history, is that I don't think in some ways I'm equal to the task in terms of the way in which Reverend Haynes documented the lives of people, the life of working with young people, the Black lives in Boston, church life, political work that he did. And it's just such a comprehensive body of work that'll take a whole team of people to sort of put together and organize it. But these are the things that I've been thinking about in the last 5 years. What did he intend by collecting and saving these things? And what is the right mechanism for sharing that and making that available to the public?
If you sat down and wrote book number 1, the first book,
The first 7 years.
right,
First chapter.
right, people would read it. You'd get a lot of people who would read that book, and then a lot of them will come to you and say, "You left this out, you left that out." They would help you to fill it in, right? Because you're not going to be able to get it all together, right? The first time all by yourself. It's when people, that's why people do the first edition and second edition of these books. That would be a tremendous challenge for you. And that may not be for you right now, but that definitely is something. I have been writing for the past 4 years, and I have a chapter just on Rev, just on him. And I'm not through filling in all the blanks with that. But so I'd love to see you, one of these days, put that together. Any one of us could sit write a chapter on his life. Abdi, do you remember, and Glenette and Richard, when the Advent Christians said to Reverend Haynes, "We want to open up New Hampshire for you. We want to
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
They wanted to open up Camp Adventure for the kids." And
that's how I met Richard Scott. I went to Camp Adventure.
Oh.
Hey, listen, if he was the one that opened the door for you, he has a confession to make about one of the vans. You want to tell that story, Richard?
No, it's just that I had to report to the Colonel Janey, who was really the general on the trustee board. We somehow got the church van stuck in a sand pit up there at the camp. And so we had to dig it out, push it, rock it, and do all that stuff and everything.
Right.
And then someone takes a picture of me with a shovel at the van, and so forth. And so
The evidence. The evidence.
They took the evidence. And so we get back, the short of it is we get back to the church, thank God. And we got the van out. And the next day, because I was the person that signed the van out, Colonel Janey comes to me with his commanding voice. What did you all do with that van there? You stand all up in it underneath in the carburetor. I was just glad that we was able to get it home. We got out that sand pit.
Yeah.
So he was the one that had the van service. Is that how he found?
Yes, that's how he found it. He saw the sand. Wasn't none on the outside. We cleaned it up pretty good.
So Abdi, how many
Yes.
years did you actually go to Camp Adventure?
Oh, between the age of 16 and all the way through 18, he baptized me at the age of 16.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was going to Camp Adventure all the way to the end of high school. Yeah.
I didn't know what Scotty was doing because he had always brought a camera, a video camera. to
Yeah.
Camp Adventure.
Yeah.
And he has that history, Abdi.
I
He
should.
has history
Wow.
of all those young people. He even has the history, the story of the dancing prophet that we won't talk about on this,
Right.
on this podcast, because I'm going to air this tomorrow. I'm going to air this tomorrow morning. I want people to hear this. But just the fact that the Advent Christians surrounded him and opened that camp for him. I've spent so many years up in New Hampshire with young people, and I've seen young people around campfires coming to know Christ.
Yes.
Mm.
And then every year, Reverend Haynes would come up to
That's
the
right.
campground and he
Do
would,
a session.
do a, to Camp Adventure, but he would also, the Advent
Oh yeah.
church would invite him to come during the summer
Speak in
and
the
do and speak in their chapel or whatever. Yeah.
And you too, eventually.
Yeah. Pastor, you did too. Yeah.
Yeah, you sure did. I wonder if you remember, Bruce, that one of the things that when you were the youth minister to 12 Baptist Church, that was like quite something else. The number of young people that would come on a Friday night,
Mm.
and we would go around the city in 2 vans. And I'm actually just so you know, Bruce, I'm actually like zooming from your old living room, and I don't know if you remember. This is the basement of Clifford Street. It's very different. You have to come by one of these.
I'm gonna have to come by and see it.
Yeah. But do you remember we used to make cheese? We used to come here and make cheese omelets, and all those young people remember. And you had a thing for cheese omelets. I'll never forget that. That left an impression on me as a teenager. But we did a trip. You took us, I think it was either New Hampshire or Vermont, I can't remember. And it was a almost cross-country bike trip. Remember?
Yes.
We went biking.
Yes.
And most of us were had never biked that far and that long.
And we had a truck that followed us with all the pots to prepare.
Yes.
And we actually
Heard of that.
we sleep over one night.
Yes. We camped over. And then the next morning they cooked that crew in the van cooked us breakfast and then we kept biking. And I think that in some ways is what I've come to understand about, in some ways mirrors a lot of what he was doing at Norfolk House. Right. And this the thing that I marvel at is that he paid attention to each one of us. And I don't know how he organized all that information about individual lives, but there, since his passing, there are people who would at his funeral would come to me and says, your father would come to, he not only got me into college, but he would just drop in.
Right. Unannounced.
Unannounced to make sure that I was attending class. And I was like, and they're like at one point they're like 10 people. And I was like, how did he have even the time to and these were driving to Connecticut, driving to to Baltimore,
Mm.
to Winston-Salem State. Like he was just dropping in on people, right?
Right.
Lincoln University, all sorts of people would say, yeah. And I just think about how, in some ways, when you were the youth minister, I got a fuller sense of what he was like as a youth worker at Norfolk House. There's a description that he and Jeep Jones
Yeah.
at Norfolk House
Another guy.
went and painted the basketball courts so that people could see like how the basketball court was sort of marked out. They would just go buy paint and then they would just sort of paint it, and then they would bring lights so that they could bring young people in the evening and they could play basketball into the evening, right? And he had this sense, and I just think in some ways my own experience of TBC as a teenager, in a lot of ways, sort of very, very similar to what people like who are part of the Exquisites describe as this kind of deep attention to young people's lives and what they're going to become. And this kind of pouring, he loved the word pouring into, like that verb is very important. You pour into someone all that you can until they get on their feet, right? And for me, that was the sort of the framework that I carried into my teaching profession.
Oh,
For me, that my sort of extension of pouring into someone until they get on their feet meant that I would pour into young people in my classroom all the ideas and research that I had done so that they could see themselves as intellectuals, as brilliant people capable of high quality work. And that was my translation. And I suspect that your translation of his life were those cheese omelets. I mean, it's more than that, Bruce, of course. But for me, when I think about your ministry as a youth minister, it was the cheese omelets. It was the long road trips on a bike. And it was one of them. I wish we had done more of them, or the Friday nights where young people are driving around in the city and not getting into trouble because they are in good fellowship and they're getting pizza by Northeastern, going to the movies together, and there's community there. So I don't know where I was going with that, Bruce, but it just something clicked in me.
Well, shockingly, we have 3 minutes left. It is 8:54, and we have to end at
talk about
Can I
it
just
today.
say one other thing that really stands out about Reverend Haynes? Of course, I was in the youth choir, Scott was in the youth choir, and we'd have these annual concerts, and Reverend Haynes was the MC.
Yes.
And I mean, he was fabulous. The way that he addressed or introduced the songs, phenomenal. And so, sometimes, when you go to these concerts, MCs are boring. He wasn't boring. He was giving lessons in between the song.
Yeah.
And then another thing that really,
Words.
another thing I loved about Reverend Haynes was he loved dogs.
Yes.
We all knew his dogs for years.
Right. Ginger
So
was the first.
Yes.
Ginger was the first.
Yeah.
And he took over Abdi's dog.
Yeah.
The dog was always upstairs with Reverend Haynes. So.
Yeah.
Because he said, at my age, I'm not going to buy another dog. It was tough when they had to put him to sleep, but he fell in love with your dog, Abdi. And
who's 15 now and is acting like a senior citizen.
Wow. 15 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's like 90 something in dog years. Yeah.
Well, we ought to do something like this again and open it up to more people, and not wait to the anniversary of his transition to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other people that if I had reached out to them, they would have wanted to be a part of this. So, FD, again,
Birthday, for his birthday in May.
birthday in May. In May.
Oh, sure.
Abdi, I said, Abdi and I were not sure how we were going to do this, and Abdi thought that I was just going to pose a lot of questions, and I said it needs to be just organic. It just happens, and so Glenette and Richard, thanks for coming on and helping us. So I'm going to air this at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, so that people in their cars driving to work or whatever they're doing will be able to hear this conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Pastor Wall, you saw the text back and forth about how scared I was about doing this. So thanks. Thanks for
You are
making
cool.
it.
Collective. You talking?
Yeah, you did it. You did it. Richard, could you close us out in prayer?
Yes, yes. Lord, we thank you for how you fashioned, how you timed, how you put together and orchestrated